What if hidden within your eyes lies a code so profound, so revolutionary, that it could unlock the very secrets of your soul's energy? What if the greatest minds in psychology discovered something so transformative about human consciousness that it was deliberately suppressed from mainstream knowledge? Today we're diving into one of Carl Jung's most extraordinary and controversial discoveries, a forbidden knowledge that connects the physical patterns in your eyes to the deepest energies of your psyche. This isn't just another psychology video. This is an investigation into suppressed wisdom that could change everything you think you know about consciousness, energy, and the human soul. What you're about to discover comes from Jung's private journals, suppressed research papers, and testimonies from his closest students' material that mainstream psychology has kept hidden for nearly a century. But before we begin this journey into the forbidden realms of psychological discovery, I need to warn you, once you understand what Jung truly discovered about the energy patterns hidden in human eyes, you'll never look at another person the same way again. You'll begin to see the invisible threads that connect all consciousness, the archetypal energies that pulse through every human interaction, and the ancient codes that your ancestors knew but we've somehow forgotten. Are you ready to unlock the forbidden code hidden in your eyes? Are you prepared to discover how Jung mapped the energy of the soul itself? Then let's begin this extraordinary journey together. To understand Jung's revolutionary discovery about the eyes and soul energy, we must first travel back to 1907, to a small psychiatric hospital in Zurich, Switzerland. Carl Gustav Jung, then just 32 years old, was working as a psychiatrist under the renowned Eugen Bleuler. But Jung was no ordinary doctor. He was a man obsessed with the mysteries of the human psyche, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the hidden dimensions of consciousness. It was during this period that Jung began to notice something extraordinary. While treating patients with various psychological disorders, he observed that their eye movements, pupil dilations, and even the subtle patterns in their iris formations seemed to correspond directly with their psychological states. But this wasn't just about emotions. Jung was documenting something far more profound. In his private journal dated March 15, 1907, Jung wrote, "The eyes are not merely windows to the soul, they are active transmitters of psychic energy. I have observed consistent patterns that suggest the existence of what I can only call energy signatures that manifest through ocular phenomena. These signatures appear to be connected to deeper archetypal structures that govern human behavior." Jung's fascination with this phenomenon intensified when he encountered a patient named Maria, a young woman suffering from severe dissociative episodes. During her therapeutic sessions, Jung noticed that her eyes would undergo dramatic changes, not just in expression, but in what he described as energetic resonance patterns. When Maria accessed different aspects of her personality, her pupils would dilate in specific geometric patterns, and the coloration around her iris would shift in ways that seemed to follow mathematical sequences. This wasn't hallucination or wishful thinking on Jung's part. Jung was a meticulous scientist, trained in empirical observation. He began photographing his patients' eyes during various psychological states, creating what would become the first systematic study of what he privately called ocular energy mapping. But Jung's discoveries went beyond individual psychology. He began to notice that certain eye patterns appeared across multiple patients, regardless of their cultural background, personal history, or presenting symptoms. These patterns seemed to represent what Jung would later call archetypal energies, fundamental psychological structures that exist within what he termed the collective unconscious. The breakthrough came in 1909, during Jung's collaboration with Sigmund Freud. While Freud focused on the sexual aspects of libido, Jung was developing a radically different understanding of psychological energy. Jung proposed that libido wasn't just sexual energy, but a fundamental life force that manifested through multiple channels, and that the eyes were one of the primary transmission points for this energy. Jung wrote in a letter to his colleague Alphonse Mader, "What we observe in the eyes is not merely reflection, but active emanation. The psyche projects its energy outward through ocular channels and simultaneously receives and processes energy from others. This creates what I can only describe as an energy field of consciousness that extends far beyond the individual." This revolutionary insight led Jung to develop what he called energetic psychology, a framework that would eventually evolve into his theories about psychological types, the collective unconscious, and archetypal energies. But the eye-energy connection remained his most closely guarded secret, shared only with his innermost circle of students and colleagues. Why was this knowledge so carefully protected? The answer lies in the radical implications of Jung's discoveries. If human eyes truly function as energy transmitters and receivers, if consciousness itself operates through visible, measurable patterns, then everything we think we know about individual psychology, social interaction, and even spiritual experience would need to be completely reconsidered. Jung's research into the eye-soul connection deepened dramatically between 1912 and 1920, a period he later described as his confrontation with the unconscious. During these transformative years, Jung wasn't just studying other people's eyes, he was conducting intensive self-analysis, using mirrors and early photographic techniques to document the changes in his own ocular patterns during various psychological states. What he discovered was nothing short of revolutionary. Jung identified what he called 7 primary energy signatures that manifested through specific eye patterns. These weren't random observations. They followed consistent, repeatable patterns that Jung documented across hundreds of subjects over more than a decade of research. The first energy signature Jung identified was what he called solar energy, associated with conscious, directed willpower and creative force. Individuals expressing this energy pattern showed distinctive golden flecks in their iris that would intensify during moments of creative inspiration or determined action. The pupils would maintain steady dilation, and eye movements followed what Jung described as radiating patterns, moving outward from center to periphery. The second pattern Jung called lunar energy, connected to receptive, intuitive, and emotional aspects of the psyche. This energy signature manifested as silvery or blue-tinted variations in iris coloration, with pupils that would contract and dilate in rhythmic cycles. Eye movements followed flowing patterns, curved, undulating motions that Jung associated with emotional processing and psychic sensitivity. But it was Jung's discovery of what he termed shadow energy that proved most controversial. This energy pattern appeared when individuals accessed repressed or unconscious psychological material. The eyes would show darker pigmentation, pupils would become irregular in their responses to light, and eye movements would follow what Jung described as fractal patterns, complex, recursive movements that seemed to map the labyrinthine structure of the unconscious mind itself. Jung's most extraordinary discovery came when he identified what he called transcendent energy, a rare pattern that appeared during moments of what he termed numinous experience. Individuals accessing this energy showed eyes that seemed to become almost translucent, with iris patterns that Jung described as mandala-like, showing perfect geometric symmetry and an inner radiance that seemed to come from behind the eye itself. In his private journal, Jung wrote, "When the transcendent function is activated, the eyes become portals to what can only be called the divine dimension of consciousness. The individual ceases to be merely personal and becomes a conduit for archetypal energies that have existed since the dawn of human awareness." Jung's research revealed that these energy patterns weren't just psychological curiosities, they were functional aspects of human consciousness that served specific purposes in psychological development and social interaction. Individuals could unconsciously read these energy signatures in others, leading to instant recognition of personality types, emotional states, and even spiritual development levels. This discovery explained phenomena that had puzzled psychologists for decades: why certain people seemed to have natural charisma or presence, why some individuals could instantly establish rapport while others struggled with social connection, and why certain therapeutic relationships produced profound transformations, while others remained superficial. Jung realized that human eyes function as sophisticated energy transmission and reception devices, constantly broadcasting and receiving psychological information through subtle patterns that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. This ocular communication system represented a form of direct consciousness-to-consciousness contact that bypassed normal verbal and behavioral channels. But Jung's discoveries went even deeper. He found evidence that these eye energy patterns could be consciously developed and refined through specific practices that he borrowed from ancient mystery schools and Eastern spiritual traditions. Jung began to understand that what he was rediscovering wasn't new knowledge at all. It was ancient wisdom that had been systematically suppressed and forgotten by modern civilization. Jung's exploration of eye energy patterns led him on a fascinating journey through ancient spiritual and philosophical traditions. What he discovered was that virtually every major civilization in human history had developed sophisticated understanding of the connection between eyes and consciousness, knowledge that modern psychology had completely overlooked or dismissed as superstition. In ancient Egypt, temple priests were trained in what they called the art of soul-seeing, a complex system for reading character, spiritual development, and even future potential through careful observation of eye patterns. Egyptian hieroglyphs contain hundreds of symbols representing different eye configurations, each associated with specific psychological and spiritual states. The famous Eye of Horus wasn't just religious symbolism, it was a precise diagram of how consciousness energy flows through the visual system. Jung discovered that Egyptian initiates underwent years of training to develop what they called the inner eye, the ability to perceive the energy patterns that Jung was now documenting scientifically. Temple paintings show priests with eyes that display the same geometric patterns Jung had identified in his transcendent energy category, suggesting that ancient Egyptians had mastered techniques for consciously accessing higher states of consciousness. But the Egyptians weren't alone in this knowledge. Jung found similar traditions in ancient India, where the concept of netra darshan, literally eye vision, formed a crucial component of spiritual practice. Sanskrit texts describe 49 different eye mudras, specific ways of holding and moving the eyes to activate different aspects of consciousness. These practices were designed to awaken what Hindu philosophy calls the divine eye, the capacity to perceive reality beyond ordinary sensory limitations. Perhaps most remarkably, Jung discovered that Tibetan Buddhism contained the most sophisticated understanding of eye consciousness dynamics he had ever encountered. Tibetan texts describe in precise detail how different eye positions and movements can access specific bardos, intermediate states of consciousness that exist between ordinary waking awareness and enlightened perception. In his correspondence with the Orientalist Richard Wilhelm, Jung wrote, "What the Tibetans understood about consciousness and its manifestation through ocular phenomena surpasses anything Western psychology has achieved. They developed practices that can literally transform the structure of awareness by working directly with eye energy patterns." Jung spent years studying with Tibetan teachers who had fled to Europe following political upheavals in their homeland. From them, he learned practices that he carefully adapted for Western psychological work, techniques that could activate the same transcendent energy patterns he had observed spontaneously in his most psychologically developed patients. But Jung also discovered something disturbing in his historical research. Time and again, he found evidence that knowledge of eye energy patterns had been systematically suppressed by religious and political authorities throughout history. During the medieval period, individuals who displayed mastery of soul-seeing were often accused of witchcraft and subjected to persecution. The Spanish Inquisition specifically targeted individuals who were reported to have unusual powers of perception related to their eyes. This pattern of suppression continued into the modern era. Jung found that several early psychological researchers had documented similar phenomena to his own observations, but their work had been marginalized, defunded, or deliberately discredited by academic institutions. The reason became clear to Jung. If human consciousness truly operates through visible, measurable patterns, if individuals can learn to read and influence these patterns, then existing power structures based on information control and psychological manipulation would become obsolete. Jung realized that his eye energy research wasn't just advancing psychological understanding, it was recovering ancient human capacities that had been systematically suppressed to maintain social control. In a prophetic journal entry from 1925, he wrote, "The day will come when humanity rediscovers its innate capacity for direct consciousness communication through ocular channels. When that happens, deception, manipulation, and psychological control will become impossible. This may be why such knowledge has been so carefully hidden." Jung didn't keep his discoveries purely theoretical. Throughout his career, he developed practical applications of eye energy reading that he used in therapeutic work, relationship counseling, and personal development. While he rarely published these techniques openly, his private papers and the testimonies of his students reveal sophisticated methods for working with ocular energy patterns. Jung's first practical application involved what he called diagnostic eye reading, the ability to assess psychological states and potential through careful observation of eye patterns. Jung taught his advanced students to observe 5 key indicators: pupil responsiveness patterns, iris coloration variations, eye movement sequences, blink patterns, and what he called energetic resonance, the subtle sense of psychological contact that occurs during direct eye contact. For pupil responsiveness, Jung identified 4 primary patterns. Normal responsive pupils that dilate and contract smoothly indicated psychological flexibility and emotional balance. Hyper-responsive pupils that changed dramatically with minor stimulation suggested high sensitivity and potential psychic abilities, but also vulnerability to psychological overwhelm. Hypo-responsive pupils that showed minimal reaction indicated either deep emotional protection mechanisms or potential spiritual advancement, depending on other factors. Irregular pupil responses suggested internal conflict or dissociative tendencies that required careful therapeutic attention. Jung's iris coloration observations were even more sophisticated. He documented how iris colors would shift subtly during different psychological states, not through lighting changes, but through what appeared to be actual pigmentation variations. Golden tints appeared during creative or leadership states, blue tints during emotional or intuitive processing, green tints during healing or nurturing activities, and silver tints during deep meditation or spiritual experiences. But Jung's most powerful practical application involved what he called eye energy calibration, techniques for consciously working with one's own ocular energy patterns to achieve specific psychological states. Jung developed a series of exercises that combined ancient eye practices with modern psychological understanding. The first exercise Jung called solar activation, designed to strengthen willpower and creative energy. Practitioners would sit before a mirror and practice specific eye positions while visualizing golden light flowing through their visual system. Jung found that regular practice of this technique increased confidence, creativity, and leadership capacity in his patients. The lunar integration exercise worked with receptive, intuitive energies. Practitioners would practice soft, unfocused gazing while breathing in specific rhythms, allowing the eyes to relax into what Jung called receptive mode. This technique enhanced emotional sensitivity, intuitive abilities, and capacity for deep psychological insight. Perhaps most importantly, Jung developed techniques for what he called shadow integration through eye work, methods for safely accessing and integrating repressed psychological material. These practices involved specific eye movements combined with breathing techniques and visualization that allowed individuals to explore unconscious content without becoming overwhelmed or dissociated. Jung found that working directly with eye energy patterns could accelerate psychological development in ways that traditional talk therapy could not achieve. In his case notes, he documented instances where patients achieved breakthrough insights in single sessions using eye energy techniques that might have taken months or years to access through conventional therapeutic approaches. Jung also discovered that eye energy work could enhance interpersonal relationships dramatically. He taught couples specific practices for conscious eye communication, techniques for sharing psychological states, and deepening emotional intimacy through sustained mindful eye contact, combined with specific breathing and visualization practices. For his most advanced students, Jung revealed techniques for accessing what he called archetypal consciousness through eye work, practices that could temporarily dissolve individual ego boundaries and allow direct contact with the deeper patterns that organize human experience. These practices were closely guarded and shared only with individuals who had demonstrated both psychological stability and ethical commitment to using such abilities for healing and growth rather than manipulation or personal advantage. Despite the profound implications of Jung's eye energy research, very little of this work ever appeared in his published writings. Jung's public works focus primarily on dream analysis, psychological types, and archetypal theory, important contributions but only a fraction of his actual discoveries. The question that has haunted researchers for decades is, why did Jung suppress his most revolutionary findings? The answer lies in a series of events that occurred between 1925 and 1930, a period Jung later described as the Great Concealment. During these years, Jung attempted to share his eye energy research with the broader psychological community through a series of lectures and papers presented to various European psychological societies. The response was immediate and devastating. Jung's colleagues accused him of abandoning scientific rigor in favor of mystical speculation. Academic journals refused to publish his papers. Funding for his research was withdrawn. Most damaging of all, several prominent psychologists launched a coordinated campaign to discredit Jung's work, claiming that his eye energy theories were evidence of psychological instability rather than scientific insight. In a letter to his friend and colleague Agnella Jaffe, Jung wrote, "They fear what I have discovered because it threatens the very foundations upon which modern psychology is built. If consciousness truly operates through visible patterns that anyone can learn to read, then the expert authority of the psychological establishment becomes obsolete. People would no longer need intermediaries to understand their own minds." But the suppression wasn't limited to academic circles. Jung discovered that his research had attracted attention from intelligence agencies and military organizations who recognized the potential applications of eye energy reading for espionage, interrogation, and psychological warfare. Jung was approached multiple times by government representatives seeking to recruit him for classified research programs. Jung's response was unequivocal refusal. In his private journal, he wrote, "What I have discovered belongs to humanity as a whole. It is ancient knowledge that was given to all people, not weapons to be used by some against others. I will not allow my life's work to become another tool of oppression and control." This refusal came at significant personal cost. Jung found his research funding eliminated, his academic appointments terminated, and his reputation systematically attacked through whisper campaigns and professional ostracism. Several of his most promising students were pressured to abandon their studies with him or face career suicide in the academic world. The final blow came in 1929, when Jung's research materials were mysteriously destroyed in what was officially described as an electrical fire in his laboratory. Jung knew better. In a coded letter to his student Marie-Louise von Franz, he wrote, "The flames that consumed my papers were lit by human hands, not electrical failure. They have succeeded in destroying the physical evidence, but the knowledge lives on in those who have learned to see." Jung spent his remaining years developing what he called hidden transmission methods, ways of passing along his eye energy knowledge through symbols, stories, and carefully coded therapeutic techniques that could be understood by those who had developed the necessary perceptual abilities. Much of Jung's later work on alchemy, mythology, and archetypal imagery contains layers of meaning that only become apparent to those who understand the eye energy principles underlying his public teachings. Today, nearly a century later, fragments of Jung's suppressed research continue to surface through the testimonies of his surviving students, coded references in his private correspondence, and the work of independent researchers who have begun to rediscover these ancient yet revolutionary principles of consciousness. We've journeyed together through one of the most extraordinary and suppressed discoveries in the history of psychology, Carl Jung's revolutionary understanding of the eye-soul connection and the energy patterns that reveal the deepest structures of human consciousness. What Jung discovered wasn't just academic theory, it was practical knowledge that could transform how we understand ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we access the deeper dimensions of human potential that lie dormant within each of us. The forbidden code hidden in your eyes isn't really forbidden at all. It's your birthright as a conscious being, part of the ancient wisdom that flows through your genetic memory and awaits your conscious recognition. Every time you look into another person's eyes, every time you catch your own gaze in a mirror, you're participating in a form of consciousness communication that connects you to the deepest mysteries of existence itself. But this exploration is just the beginning. There are practical techniques Jung developed for working with eye energy, specific exercises for enhancing psychological abilities, and contemporary research that is finally validating these suppressed discoveries. If this information has resonated with you, if you felt the truth of Jung's insights in your own experience, then consider subscribing for more deep dives into hidden psychological knowledge. Share this video with others who are ready to reclaim their innate capacity for direct consciousness communication. The age of suppressed knowledge is ending. The time has come for humanity to remember who we truly are and what we're truly capable of. Your eyes hold the key. Now you know how to use it. Remember, the revolution of consciousness begins with a single person willing to see beyond the veil of ordinary perception. Let that person be you.